Hey everyone, welcome to our Activate webinar about how to reconcile journal entries between QuickBooks and Activate. I'm Eva Reese and I'm a Client Solutions Specialist here. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Right. So we're going to be discussing the following questions. I don't have a lot of slides because I want to get to the demo portion of the webinar. I also know that we should have quite a few questions about this topic, so I've tried to leave enough time to really answer them in detail. All right. So first, let's talk about how journal entries work with QuickBooks. Activate sends summarized journal entries to QuickBooks. We're going to summarize them based on the transaction type and when you actually run the sync. So here's an example. I have 3 receipt transactions that are posted to the same warehouse by 9 a.m. I run a sync and all 3 are summarized into one journal entry in QuickBooks. If I do 2 more receipts for that warehouse and then run another sync that same day, we will have another journal entry posted to QuickBooks. So I'll have 2 journal entries, one for 3 receipts total and one for 2 receipts total. If I had waited until all 5 receipts were posted and then ran a sync with QuickBooks, I would just have 1 journal entry posted for that date. So again, it's by transaction type because we want to make sure that we're doing a journal entry for the same types of items at the same time. And it's by sync. So whenever you whenever you run the sync. One of the big reasons we summarize journal entries is because it does save space in your QuickBooks file. And since the transactions are happening in Activate anyways, the details information is going to be there. So we don't need to clog up your QuickBooks file with the same exact information. All right, so first let's talk about what reports we want to use when we talk about reconciling journal entries in QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, you can go to the chart of accounts and right-click on the account that you want to research, and you'll see the options that I have in this screenshot. The 2 of the lower options are the ones we recommend you use. The first one is called Use Register. It pulls up the register of the account where you see each journal entry in detail. The other one that I really like to use is the Quick Report for this account. And the Quick Report option gives you the ability to easily filter the posted journals by date. So if I'm looking back at a particular date, or if I need to troubleshoot what happened and when, that's when I'm going to use the Quick Report. If I'm just looking at the most recent entries, Use Register is going to be just fine. Another function I really like to use when I'm troubleshooting a sync log error or something about a particular journal in QuickBooks is the Control F function. You can hit Control F on pretty much any window in QuickBooks and a search window is going to pop up. You can use the search for pretty much anything in QuickBooks by the type, so you can search on invoices, customers, things like that. I like to use it to search for journal entries. When I want to double check how they're showing up in QuickBooks, or maybe I want to see if there's duplicates of the same number, things like that, it's going to quickly get me the answer. And I'll show you how we use that in our demo portion. All right, so let's go over the reports in Activate that we're going to use for this. We're going to find the reports that we're going to use under the Inventory Management section of reports and then under Transactions. And I've highlighted the 3 that we use the most. Those 3 are the Inventory Detail Journal, the Inventory Detail Journal by Account, and Inventory Summary Journal. The Inventory Detail Journal by Account gives you an easy way to find entries for a particular account itself, or to just group detail journal entries by the account so you can see the difference between the asset and everything else. The Inventory Detailed Journal report itself, I typically use for just when I have a specific journal entry I want to pull up. The Summary Journal report looks more like what you actually see in QuickBooks. It's broken out by account, and it's summed for each journal entry posted to that account. This report, I really use it to see at a glance if the account balances match between Activate and QuickBooks for a given time period. If they don't match, then you can find the specific journal that's off in the report and look that journal up in the detail. I've also added the inventory transaction reports as a type you'll probably need to use when reconciling journal entries. Since Acctivate summarizes multiple transactions into one journal, you'll find the transaction session number in the detail report, and then you can use that to look up the transaction itself to see what you actually did. And I'll, again, show you this more when we get into the demo itself. Okay, so these are 3 questions we probably get asked most often when it comes to journal entries. I'm going to go through each of them to give you steps to reconcile them between Acctivate and QuickBooks. So I'll give you a moment to look those over. And this is really the end of my slides. So I told you I didn't have very many. And that's because I wanted to, again, get into the demo, show you guys how this actually works in the system itself. All right. So I've got my QuickBooks and my Acctivate files open. First, I'm going to go into my lists, go to chart of accounts, and then I'm going to go to my inventory asset, and I'm going to run a quick report for this asset account. All the way down at the bottom, I'm going to choose quick report. And I'm using the quick report again because I want to filter by a specific date range. So I can actually go in here and I can go in from, and I can do January 1st, and then to January 31st, and refresh it. And then now I have the total for the month. So with that, let's go into Acctivate and run my summary journal. And let me make this a little bit bigger so you can kind of see. In case you don't know, every single time that a entry is posted into QuickBooks from Acctivate, you're actually going to see a memo that has the word Acctivate in it. So that's a really quick and easy way to tell if Acctivate created the journal entry or not. Because you absolutely can still create journal entries on your own in QuickBooks itself. So let's go into Acctivate and now look at that report. So I'm going to hit reports. You can also find it by going to inventory and going to inventory reports. Same idea. So we'll go under inventory. We're going to go under transactions and we're going to do the inventory summary journal. And we're going to choose the beginning and ending date the same as what we did in QuickBooks. And we're going to preview it. Oops, sorry. I also meant to choose the specific account. Inventory asset. Awesome. All right. So now we can see that my inventory asset total for the month right here, I'm not really paying attention to the balance because the balance in Acctivate is always going to be slightly different than QuickBooks, and that's because the beginning balance isn't really ever seen in Acctivate in the same way. So with that, the balance can be used when you're doing it as of the current date. A little bit more, but when you're doing it for a date range, I really just look at this amount here. And this is the amount change throughout the month. So I have a positive amount change and I have a negative amount change in the 2 systems. So if I had a lot more journal entries than I have right here, I would want to go back to QuickBooks and kind of narrow it down and see when exactly it happened as to when the 2 got off. So I'd probably start with the first week of the month and just to run the report for, let's say, until the Saturday. Then I'd go and run it for the 5th to the 11th and so on. And I'd run it in both systems until I get to a week that the 2 are different. And then that's where I would be paying attention to the journal entries within that week to find the journal entries that are incorrect. So in my case, I definitely don't have very many. So I'm going to either take these two reports and print them out and cross out the journals that match, or I can export them to Excel and do the same, maybe with a pivot table if I wanted to get fancy, things like that. But I can easily see that I have some issues. So if we look here, I have journal number 1145. It's actually one of the highest dollar journal entries, and it doesn't exist in QuickBooks. So for 127, I have 146, 147, 149, and 150, and 148, and I do not have a 145. So that tells me that there's, a value of $9,000 that's not being posted to my inventory asset account. And there can be a few reasons why a journal may be missing from QuickBooks. One of the main reasons is that maybe there was an error in your sync log that you may not have noticed. And when I'm talking about the sync log, I'm talking about when you sync with Activate in QuickBooks, with QuickBooks within Activate, and you see a red X or a warning sign on the journal section of the sync itself, that is when you should go in and look at the sync log, and I'll show you in a moment how to do that. If you may not have noticed the sync log, and there is an error message, you can look and see if the most recent sync log has a message in it about a journal not being able to sync. Typically, the error messages are pretty good at telling you what is going on and everything. If you can't find it in your current sync log and you don't think anybody deleted it or anything like that, then you can work with our support team and they can help you find out what happened. It may be a couple months back if you haven't been paying attention to your sync logs, things like that. So in my case, the journal was accidentally deleted. So all I have to do is run a sync now, because every time a journal is deleted from QuickBooks, we actually log that, or QuickBooks logs it in a deletion log. The deletion log is something that Activate looks at every time you run a sync. And if it deleted a particular journal entry, we will then look at it and try to resync it. As far as this question we have here, why wouldn't the beginning balance in QuickBooks and Activate match? Really, it's just because we're not taking your general ledger in Activate. We don't bring in everything that you do in Activate on the general ledger itself. So my report is really just looking at things that are only in Activate. So if you ever do a journal entry in QuickBooks, we're never going to bring that into Activate. So it's not going to have an accurate reading for that one, which, again, you shouldn't be posting anything in your asset account unless it's being posted from Activate. So that one specifically, may match a little bit more. Mine isn't because I'm using a demo database. All right. So now if we go back here, and so I want to sync over 1145, I'm going to go to QuickBooks, synchronize, and start the sync. So while that's running, we can look at a couple of the other journal entries. There are some of them are showing as $0 in the Activate report, and those are inventory transfers and inventory assemblies. When I transfer between two warehouses that use the same asset account, it's going to come out as a $0 balance, and so we're going to just show that at $0 in the Activate report itself. In the case of an assembly, assemblies should be balancing out as well. And so we're going to, especially if we're doing it from two different warehouses or the same warehouse, it's going to use the same asset account and balance to $0. All right, so our sync is almost done. We're on the journal side now. And it's closed the connection to QuickBooks. So when I say look at the log, if you have anything other than green check marks on your sync, you should hit view log here. And in this log right itself, it will actually have a line telling you what happened, if it was a warning or an error message, things like that. All right. Now I'm going to go into QuickBooks and I'm going to refresh this report. and I should now have 1145. So now my balance is a little bit better, and it's still off. It's still off by about 4,000, so I'm going to continue looking at these journal entries and see what's wrong. And now I can see that another one that's throwing off our balance is 1144, and that's because we have it as a duplicate. I can see that it's posted twice to the same exact account for the same exact amount, and that should never happen. Remember, all journals have two sides, but if you see a journal that is posting with the same amount to the same exact account, it's going to be a duplicate. The way to handle duplicates is actually pretty simple. You're going to delete both records from QuickBooks, and the reason for this is because we don't know which one is actually connected to Activate. One of these is connected to Activate, and one of them is not. And when I say connected, I mean that Activate has a record of the QuickBooks internal ID, which is a very specific number for each individual journal. And Activate saved that internal ID, and now if any adjustments were made, or maybe I needed to, change something later on, like in this case, it's a receipt. If I bring in the vendor bill, and the vendor bill is for a different amount than the original receipt was posted as, we're actually going to go back to the original receipt for you and Activate and change the original receipt. So that's why we need to make sure that the connections are still there. So with that, I'm going to delete both entries because I don't know which one is right. And again, because I have that deletion log, Activate's going to go in and say, oh, you deleted this. That's a mistake. I'm going to go in and recreate it. So to delete it, I'm just going to open it up, and I can hit edit transaction on them and delete them. So yes, I want to delete this, and go back. I have one still here, so I'm going to hit edit transaction again and delete the transaction. All right. Now, let me close out of this. Refresh my quick report. I now have a negative balance, and I'm going to run the sync with Activate again to push over the $4,000 for this actual receipt. So while that sync is running, let's chat about why we may have journal entry errors. So what the most common reason for errors are. One most common one is you have multiple users running the sync at one time. When you run a sync with Activate in QuickBooks, the best practice is to make sure that no one else is already running the sync. So that way, then we're not splitting journals or transactions across journals and things like that. The second most common reason for errors is you may set a closing date in QuickBooks and you didn't run a sync with Activate right away to send the closing date over to Activate as well. And so this allows a user to post things in the closed period in Activate because Activate didn't know there was a closing date. And so we try to sync them over to QuickBooks, and then QuickBooks says, I can't accept that. It's within a closed period. So always set the closing date and immediately run a sync with Activate. Those are the ones that we see most often. The causes for duplicate entries can be varied. I can't think of one main reason. I think it just really varies. It doesn't happen very often. We're just going over the case that if it does happen, this is what you can do to find out why you may be going through and seeing a difference. All right, so now when I look at my QuickBooks and refresh this, I have a total change throughout from 1/1 to 1/31 of $3,228.02. And that is exactly what my inventory asset change is in Activate. So one question that we get a lot that I didn't go over yet is, what if the journal totals are different between Activate and QuickBooks? For those transactions, I would actually delete the entry from QuickBooks, the same thing that we did for the duplicates, and run the sync again. Since Activate is the program of record, essentially where the transaction originated, we want to bring the value from Activate over to QuickBooks. So we troubleshooted all those issues without even knowing the details of the transactions. So let's look about how to find the details of some particular transactions. And let's use Journal 1145 for that as well. So if I want to know what transactions went into that journal, I'm going to look at the detailed journal report. And since I have the journal number, I don't need to look it up by account. So I could look it up by account and see all of the entries that go to all of these journal numbers for 1/1 to 131. But since I know I want to look at what happened in 1145, why it has a total of $9,000, I can just do the journal detail report and not have to worry about that. So we're going to go here, do inventory detailed journal. And all I have to select here is the journal ID. And we'll preview. And now I can see that everything in this receipt transaction, because it is an inventory receipt, and you'll actually know that based on what it says in the memo in QuickBooks. If you look at 1145, it definitely says Activate Inventory Receipt. We'll tell you exactly what type of transaction it is. For all of the transactions in the inventory asset account, including cost of goods sold, you'll have a detailed journal entry. The cost of goods sold just won't have a transaction report to look at. It will instead point you to an invoice that you posted to look at the cost of goods sold on. Okay, so going back to this, now I have this session in here. The session is the inventory transaction that actually created the journal, or was included in the journal. So I have session number 43, 46, 42, 47, 49, 48, and 45, and I believe that's it. Yeah. So with that, essentially what that means is this goes to show you that we do actually kind of summarize the journal entries. We have several different receipt transactions within this one journal entry in QuickBooks. So if I have any questions on, what PO did these come from? Why did I post this? Maybe the amount is off from what I normally see for this product, because we do show you the product. Then I can look at this particular session. So let's go and research session 43. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close out of this, and I'm going to go to the inventory receipts section, and I'm going to select that. And then here I'm going to put in the session number equal to 43. So here is our inventory receipt, session 43. We have our PO number here. If I double click on it, I can pull it up, things like that, to actually see what we were supposed to receive versus what we actually received. All that sort of information is available. And yeah, this is going to give me, I did actually receive in 200 like I was supposed to, and I brought them in for $340 total. All right, and that's just one example of the inventory transactions that you can look up. Receipts are pretty simple. You can look up any of them within the actual reports themselves to see what happened in the details. And the way you would find the details again is by looking up the detailed journal information to get the session ID. So there's many more instances where we may want to know how to reconcile journal entries. So I know that I went through this kind of fast, so I'd like to open it up now to questions. And let me see the ones that we've already answered and see if there were any that we wanted to kind of elaborate on. Okay, so here's one, again, talking about deleted journal entries in Activate in QuickBooks. Essentially, if I void a transaction, let's say I voided transaction number 43 in Activate, it's going to still have the journal entry go over into QuickBooks, because all of the rest of the transactions are still there. It would just have a new total. And so that's essentially where we see when things happen where the Activate total differs from the QuickBooks total. It's because maybe we removed a transaction, or we changed a transaction due to posting a vendor bill or something like that. If we delete, again, the journal from QuickBooks, that's when Activate will recreate the journal in QuickBooks for you with the correct amount. So this was a question: if a period is closed, will Activate sync data back into the closed period? And that's where we were talking about the closing date is very important. If you set a closing date in QuickBooks, you need to immediately run a sync with Activate, because Activate will think that the period is open and you will be able to post it in Activate. But then when you run a sync with QuickBooks, you will get an error message essentially saying that the period is closed and you're not able to sync that transaction. So always make sure that you are running that sync immediately after setting your closing period. So this question is, where is the delete log I talk about in Activate? It's not in Activate, it's actually in the database. You're not really going to be able to see this. This is something that the support team utilizes to troubleshoot certain things, to make sure that things are going through correctly. But I've never had an instance where the customer or the user actually needs to see this itself. All right, so this is a good question. I'm looking for a sales order number for a specific journal entry. How do I get the sales orders? So let's find one of my journals that was a cost of goods sold one. Okay, so we'll look at 1085. And let me go in and close this. I'm going to go to the detailed journal, and I'm going to look up that specific journal. Equal to 1085. And then now I can see exactly which ones are actually going to it. And sorry, my report doesn't show the invoice number. Apologies there. Another way, that I can actually do this is by going to the product, going to the transactions, finding a transaction for the date, which is 125. This does show me one sale for that date, and so I can see the order number here if you can't find it in the report. If you do want the report itself to show it, you can contact our support team and have them add that in. This question is about a rounding error. You're having issues with rounding errors after changing an invoice. How do you fix these? I guess really I need more information to know why you're changing the invoice and how you're changing it. Essentially, if you have an invoice that's posted from Activate and you're changing it in QuickBooks, the question would be why. Because if you're doing it from Activate, Activate's going to override the changes in QuickBooks anyways. So if you're voiding the invoice in Activate because you can't change an invoice in Activate, this is something that you would need to void and recreate it. If it's not voiding it in QuickBooks, maybe because of a journal entry or a sync error, then that's something you can work with our support team on. So this is a good question. Is this done monthly? Honestly, this is something that you would need to do based on what you are seeing within your own QuickBooks and Activate files. I definitely see that users do this at least monthly when closing out the months, or making sure that all of the transactions are posted for the month, at least running the inventory summary journal side with the QuickBooks to double check that all of the numbers at the bottom, the total amounts, are balancing. If they do balance, then you don't have to worry about the rest of the stuff. If they don't balance, that's when you would go in and troubleshoot each individual transaction or journal entry. This is a question not necessarily related to journal entries, but it's about canceling a purchase order. You should be able to cancel a PO and leave the product line on the PO and not remove it, and change the status to canceled, and then the product will not show anything on PO. Hope that answers your question. We'll do a few more questions, and then I think this will just be a short little webinar. I know we needed to cover this topic, so I'm glad that we did. This is a good question. Are we going to do a follow-up? In case you want to actually get in, try this out and then have any questions. This is something that you can absolutely talk to our support team about in more detail. They're happy to walk through your specific scenarios and teach you how to look up your transactions and make sure that you're doing everything correctly. This webinar will be recorded, or it is being recorded. I will be posting it to our activate.com site. I'm not sure if this question is asking what accrued purchase receipts should have open. Essentially, accrued purchase receipts is an account in QuickBooks. This account is utilized to actually, let me see if I can find mine. There we go. This account is utilized to be the intermediary between the time that you receive something and the time you get the bill for it. So it's a purchase suspense account. This account should have an open balance if you have open POs. So if you have received the items, but you have not yet gotten the bill or posted the bill for them, then you will see an open balance on this account. Now in my case, my demo data is pretty bad on this. So we have a pretty significant balance. But the balance should only be for those open POs where we have received the items. If you have a accrued purchase receipts balance and you have trouble troubleshooting, what actually is posted to it and things like that, the support team can help you with determining kind of what your next steps are to reconcile it. And reconciling accrued purchase receipts should happen pretty regularly. It's probably the one account that really needs, some management, just depending on what kind of transactions you are doing. Okay, so I didn't go into what happens whenever the journal totals are different between QuickBooks and Activate because I couldn't replicate that in my demo. Essentially, with that, you'll be able to see that they are different. What you do there is you will delete the journal entry from QuickBooks and then resync it over from Activate, and now you'll have the two balancing. Because Activate does change journal entries depending on what you're posting. If you post a new receipt and you backdate it to before a sale, then that may change your cost of goods sold, things like that. So we do change journal entries quite often when doing backdated transactions. So that does change things between QuickBooks and Activate. And if you have any sort of sync errors or anything like that, the journal entry may not sync over completely and change out the improper one for the right one. So reconciling accrued purchase receipts and accrued landed costs, we have a KB article on these. I can go into it a little bit, but essentially you will be able to see the summary journal with all of the journal entries for the time period you're looking at for the accrued purchase receipts count. And then the detail is definitely going to be in the inventory detail journal. You'll be able to see those receipt transactions as well. If you're needing to see what your balance should essentially be, you can look at your open purchase orders reports, and there are some consultants that also have very specific reports for this as well. If you'd like a list, we can send that out to you from support. Let's see, let me just open this because I don't know what I have in here. Essentially, I would look here and see what the issued versus the outstanding is. So if I have, that's the issue date. So the outstanding here is if I have outstanding units, then I probably shouldn't have a balance in the report. But if I have outstanding units and the PO is still, or if I don't have outstanding units and the PO is still open, or if maybe the outstanding is a different amount than what I ordered, then I do have the balance in accrued purchase receipts. So anything that I've received that I have not yet put the bill in for is what I should essentially have in accrued purchase receipts. All right, I'll go ahead and conclude this webinar. Again, we will be posting the recorded version of this webinar to our activate.com, and that will be on activate.com/webinars. If you need to look up our knowledge base, this has taken the place of our help articles. So you don't go to help.activate.com anymore. It's going to be hub.activate.com. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.